Oh howdy Dragonfly Swarm. It is finally Rappa time. She's a 5-star imaginary erudition character who focuses on dealing massive AoE super break damage with high speed, extra turns, and many other tools at her disposal. So naturally, this guide will go over everything you should know about Rappa in 2.6 Honkai Star Rail, including exactly how she works, how to build her, how to play her, and what teammates she works best with. I'll also discuss some notable topics like how she fares against other similar units like Firefly, as well as other things worth noting. But before we skydive right in, please consider subscribing if this video helps you because it very much helps my channel. Alright, so the first thing you should know is that Rappa is a super break oriented DPS character, and her kit helps her to dish out constant AoE super break damage. Rappa has two different basic attacks, the first one being a standard imaginary basic attack, boring, but the other one is an enhanced basic attack, which she is able to use when she casts her ultimate. Casting Rappa's ultimate will immediately grant her one extra turn, independent of her other turns in the queue. She'll gain some weakness break efficiency and break effect, and most importantly, she'll be granted 3 points of chroma ink. These 3 points of chroma ink allow her to use her enhanced basic attack, expending 1 point every time she uses it. Rappa's enhanced basic attack is a 3-hit combo wherein Rappa will deal damage to the target and adjacent enemies on the first 2 hits, but on the final hit of the enhanced basic attack, Rappa will deal equal damage and equal toughness damage to all enemies on the field. But there's a very interesting thing you should know about that massive third hit. Thanks to her talent, Rappa will accumulate charge points every time an enemy becomes weakness broken in combat, regardless of which teammate does the breaking, be it her or her allies. She can accumulate a total of 10 charge points, and for each point she gets, the toughness reduction and break damage she deals on that final hit of her enhanced basic attack will be increased by a certain amount. This mechanic allows that third hit in her enhanced basic attack to deal significantly increased super break damage if you manage her charge points properly, and it's a key aspect of her kit that you'll need to understand to make the most of her. You should note that because Rappa inflicts imaginary break, she actually delays enemies from recovering their toughness bars, so in some scenarios it can be harder for Rappa to farm weakness break and stack up her charge points for big damage. You can kinda get around this by allowing other non-imaginary teammates to inflict weakness break for her whenever possible, but I'll talk more about that in the team section. Rappa's skill will deal imaginary damage to all enemies on the field, but you won't honestly be using it all too often. Rappa's other ascension traces will further buff her playability though. The first one converts the toughness reduction of her enhanced basic attack into an instance of super break damage when striking weakness broken enemies. The second one grants Rappa an extra charge point and 10 energy anytime an elite or boss enemy becomes weakness broken, which is really nice. Rappa's third trace passive causes enemies to take more break damage for 2 turns when becoming weakness broken, and the break damage bonus is increased by 1% for every 100 attacks she has above 2400. So for example, if your Rappa has 3200 attack when an enemy becomes broken, that enemy will now take 2% extra break damage at a baseline, plus another 8% because of her attack. And finally, Rappa's technique puts her on a surfboard sort of thing and starts a combat with the first enemy she comes into contact with. When combat starts, she'll immediately dish out a heavy amount of toughness reduction and break damage to targets on the field, plus she'll regenerate 10 energy. This technique is surprisingly extremely useful for quickly bringing Rappa online because she can open the battle with several weakness broken enemies, which will quickly stack her charge points, and the extra 10 energy helps to get her ultimate up for use as soon as it's convenient for you. Altogether, Rappa's kit makes her very effective in combat with multiple enemies where she or her team can claw through toughness bars, stack up her charge points, and allow her to hit massive AoE super break nukes with her fully charged third enhanced basic attack. I do have one note about the intricate details of her kit though. Since Rappa's ultimate grants her an extra turn, not just an action advancement, you can get away with being more crafty when deciding how and when to cast her ultimate and then begin slapping enemies with her attacks. But more importantly, it'll mean that you can more easily stack the team's buffs on her and then cast her ultimate during her turn, so that she'll then be able to perform 2 consecutive enhanced basics, both of which enhanced attacks will be covered by your team's buffs. But anyway, now that you know how Rappa works, it's probably also important to know how to build her. Actually, it's very important, but I'm sure you knew that. Rappa, much like any other super break DPS, is quite easy to build. Generally, her best relic set will be 4-piece cavalry, and in AoE combat in particular, it reigns as her strongest and by far her most consistent set. It does technically fall behind in combat with less than 3 enemies, but even so, it remains by far her most consistent, and it's the set that I'd recommend farming. But if you don't have the means to give her a 4-piece cavalry, cavalry yet, you can temporarily run her with a 2-piece break effect and 2-piece speed combo if it has good substats. Do note that 4-piece shooting meteor can outperform cavalry in situations where you're able to make great use of the energy passive, like in Pure Fiction, where Rappa can constantly break enemy weakness bars, allowing her to easily main that ultimate uptime that she needs to thrive in there. With planars though, Rappa finds the most comfort with the Talia set, regardless of whether she's facing AoE combat or single target combat. And the only thing that can outperform it is the Calpagni set, but that's only if she's consistently attacking enemies who have fire weakness, which is situational. Your best bet for planar sets will typically be Talia. For your main stats, you'll want to maximize her damage, and in order to best do that, Rappa's body piece should be attack percent and she should run speed boots. Then her sphere should also be attack percent and her rope should be a break effect rope. Rappa's stat goals will look something like this. You'll want to at least try to reach the 134 speed goal so she can take 2 turns in the first cycle, but further speed breakpoints such as 146, 156, and 160 are strong too if you can reliably reach them. Rappa does not need crit stats, but she does need plenty of attack to maximize her A6 trace, so your goal should be 3200 attack, but any more than that would be a bit of a waste. And finally, in terms of break effect, you will need a lot of it, essentially as much of it as you can get. Of course, don't forgo your speed goals or your attack goals, but after meeting those, stack as much break effect as you can get, keeping in mind that especially with the cavalry relic set, you'll need at least 250% in combat. Moving on to Lightcones though, it's time to have an interesting discussion. As an erudition character, Rappa doesn't have many Lightcones at her disposal to help with her kit currently, which begs for things like energy and break effect and speed and break effect and break effect and break effect. You get my point. Break-based erudition Lightcones are few and far between, but there are options that we can discuss, and we'll start with her signature Lightcone, which is obviously her best. Ninjutsu Inscription is tailor-made for Rappa, obviously, and is currently one of the only break-focused erudition Lightcones in the game, but further than that, its passive provides some very interesting utility that allows Rappa to come online in a way that no other Lightcone can match. Obviously, it provides a massive amount of break effect, which she enjoys, but it also provides Rappa 30 energy upon entering battle, which ironically is exactly the amount she needs in order to get her burst if she opens the combat with her technique into her skill. This 30 energy will allow Rappa to essentially open the battle with her ultimate, cutting down her ramp up time immensely. Further than that though, the action advance passive it provides also allows her to stay online much easier and continuously dish out enhanced attacks and super break nukes. Generally, I would recommend pulling for this Lightcone before trying to grab Rappa's first Eidolon if you were planning on investing heavily into her, because it considerably boosts her performance, especially in AoE combat. But I guess if you're not trying to become a professional full-time skydiving ninja, there are other options for Lightcones. For consistency, Rappa's best and most consistent alternative Lightcone will be after the Charmony Fall, which is unfortunately locked behind Gacha as well, but even at S1, it remains one of her strongest options regardless of whether she's in AoE combat or not. The only other Lightcones worth mentioning though are any that'll help Rappa reach her 3200 attack goal so that she can save her substats for more break effect or speed. So Lightcones like the free-to-play Eternal Calculus will be a decent fallback option in AoE combat, or you could get away with Night on the Milky Way for similar reasons if you have it. Both perform relatively similar overall. And there are, of course, other Lightcones that can work in niche situations, but for conciseness, I'm only going to mention these recommendations because they are the most consistently powerful for Rappa currently. But the next thing you'll need to focus on after building your Rappa is her best teammates and teams. Much like Firefly, who was our other recent addition to the Super Break damage roster, Rappa's teams are centered entirely around enabling and buffing Super Break with characters like Harmony Trailblazer, Ruan Mei, and Gallagher or Lingsha. This team is currently one of the strongest archetypes in the game and is generally notably less expensive to invest in than other archetypes because HMC is completely free to obtain, and Gallagher is not only a 4-star but a very strong 4-star. Nonetheless though, there are some interesting details you will need to know about these teammates before deciding which are going to be best for your Rappa and which alternatives you can work with. As the only enabler of Super Break in the entire game currently, you will need to pair Rappa with Harmony Trailblazer to bring her damage online. The majority of her damage is completely negligible if it's not being converted into Super Breaks, so not unlike Firefly, she needs HMC. The good news is though, Harmony Trailblazer is completely free to obtain and quite easy to build. They work great together thanks to HMC's several forms of buffing and their ability ability to very easily trigger weakness breaks for Rappa's charge points is nice too. The third teammate you'll need to consider for Rappa though is some sort of buffer or debuffer, namely someone like Ruan Mei, because she is still the only dedicated 5-star support option for break DPS characters, and when paired with HMC's super break enabling, Ruan Mei can significantly enhance Rappa's damage with her break efficiency increase, speed buffs, resistance penetration, etc. Her kit provides everything Rappa needs in order to smash through toughness bars quicker than she otherwise would, and then dish out significantly buffed break damage after those bars are broken. There is an anti-synergy, however, which I briefly discussed earlier in the video. One of Ruan Mei's most notable mechanics is that her ultimate allows her to significantly delay an enemy's ability to recover from weakness break, which in theory is an amazing mechanic. It gives super break DPS characters a larger window of time to dish out their super break damage. But the issue with Rappa, even despite the fact that she is a super break character, is that one of her kit's major mechanics revolves around ramping up her damage by consistently breaking toughness bars. But obviously she can't break toughness bars nearly as often when Ruan Mei is delaying them from recovering. In practice, this means that unless you're in combat with hordes of weaker enemies who die quickly and cycle in new enemies with breakable toughness bars, Rappa's charge point mechanic will be difficult to capitalize on, and she will deal less damage overall in a fight. Unfortunately, there is no way around this currently unless you put Rappa in combat with enemies who have exo toughness bars, but currently that's a rare mechanic. Ruan Mei is still a significant asset to Rappa because her buffs are immensely valuable to her, but she does limit her viability with regard to charge points, which notably affects her power in combat with fewer, tankier enemies. The good thing though is that this means there is room to introduce a new break support in the future that might replace Ruan Mei in her teams and enable Rappa to see a significant boost to her total damage potential. Anyways, if you don't have Ruan Mei, however, you can substitute her with a good handful of characters that typically give value to super break teams. Characters like Silver Wolf or Pela for their valuable defense shred, or characters like Asta who can give Rappa massive speed buffs, which she can make great use of when played correctly. The easiest to play and generally most effective substitute for Ruan Mei, however, in my experience so far, is Pela. But once you've picked out your third teammate, you will need a fourth, and there's no better way to round it all out than by slapping a sustained character in that spot. Obviously, Gallagher and Lingsha stand high above all the other options as your best choices for super break sustained teammates, but before I dive into these two characters, I'd like to note that you can technically use any number of sustain units if you don't have my recommended picks, because the main purpose of this last roll is just, well, to keep Rappa and her team alive. Any other utility beyond that is kind of just a sweet bonus. And sweet bonuses we shall discuss, because the big question recently has been, who is better for my team, Gallagher or Lingsha? Both of these characters fill very similar roles when placed in super break teams with characters like Firefly, or now with Rappa, but in Rappa's case, the conversation changes quite dramatically. For Rappa, Lingsha is by quite a large margin the best option. Her AoE potential and very efficient toughness reduction in particular make her extremely valuable for the imaginary street ninja, and another interesting thing to note is that Rappa, when played correctly, is almost completely SP neutral, allowing Lingsha to more frequently cast her skill in combat and ramp up her value that much higher. So especially in combat with multiple enemies, you'll notice that Lingsha provides a considerable boost to the team's total DPS, while also providing lots of comfort with her healing and debuff dispels. But fear not, because Gallagher is still a great alternative for Rappa, providing lots of comfort through his besotted healing, which Rappa can stack very efficiently with her blast and AoE attacks, plus he still provides a break damage boost, and can help to break enemy weaknesses for Rappa's charge points with his high toughness reduction abilities. But again, if you don't have Gallagher or Lingsha, you can technically run several other sustain options. As I've had a lot of time to test, I've found that Rappa's opening rotations are one of the most important parts of her kit, because how you handle them will determine how quickly you can ramp up her power. If you're running her signature Lightcone, you can open a combat with her technique and then cast her skill, which means if your speed is at least 134, her next turn will be in the first cycle, and she'll be able to cast her ultimate during that turn to dish out 2 full enhanced basic attacks all in that first cycle. Add to that the fact that E6 HMC can also very reliably cast their ultimate in the first turn, and boom, your Rappa is online and dishing out significant super break damage pretty much immediately. If you're not running the 2 light cones that allow her to cast her ultimate right after her first skill though, it's not the end of the world. You'll just have to expect that on average she won't get her burst up until after her second turn in the combat. Be sure to utilize her extra turn wisely and creatively, because lots of times you can stack short-lived buffs and then cast her ultimate during her turn so that she'll have 2 full enhanced basics being buffed. Before I give my final first impressions on Rappa, I want to quickly go over her Eidolons. E1 is a pretty respectable and simple boost to her damage, the defense ignore is quite valuable, and the 20 extra energy after each burst can make her a lot easier to be consistent with overall, but I'd still say her light cone is the better investment if you were deciding between one or the other. E2 is a great stopping point for investment and a considerable increase to her total DPS. The extra 50% toughness reduction will will significantly increase her super break damage on that targeted enemy, and it'll increase her viability in non-AoE combat, such as Epoch Shadow and sometimes MOC. E3 is generally kind of unnecessary, and E4 can be pretty nice if you capitalize well on the team-wide speed bonus, but I wouldn't actively reach for this specific Eidolon. E5 is also kind of unnecessary, and then E6 is, as usual, very strong. It basically increases her max charge point cap, and it gives her lots of free ways of getting her charge points, which significantly enhances her quality of life as a DPS and resolves the issue she has with Ruan Mei, as well as massively enhances her viability in combat with fewer enemies. It's a very strong final Eidolon if that's something you were considering. So, to start my final first impressions, I want to first very generally discuss the Rappa versus Firefly strength comparison. To be very straightforward, Firefly is the more versatile of the two characters because she can implant fire weakness, and she has strengths in essentially every high-end game mode currently. But Rappa is a strong character, and she most certainly has strengths over Firefly. In combat with imaginary or fire-weak enemies, Rappa can very much hold her own with similarly massive damage output, and in combat with lots of enemies, namely in areas like Pure Fiction, she feels stronger than a similarly invested Firefly. Plus, the higher you invest into Rappa and her teams, the more viable she becomes in other forms of combat like MOC and Epoch Shadow, making her even more versatile. Do keep in mind though that Rappa and Firefly both enjoy essentially the exact same pool of teammates, so keep that in mind when deciding how you'd like to spend your Stellar Jades. Overall, I think Rappa is an enjoyable addition to the HSR roster, and she adds a really fun playstyle to the Super Break archetype, specializing in areas like Pure Fiction, where she can constantly bombard the entire enemy lineup with massive super breaks. And even with low investment, she can comfortably branch out into MOC and Epoch Shadow if she's up against enemies with imaginary weakness. I understand she might not have the highest pull rate right now, considering she's running around the same time as several other very popular characters, but I think she has a great future ahead of her as the roster expands and her banners make comebacks. Please subscribe if this video helped you, and join my Discord server for more updates. See you in the next video.